Benny the bunny lived in a lovely meadow. It was nestled beside a babbling brook. The grass grew tall and sweet. Buttercups dotted the meadow like golden coins. I loved my home. I loved to hop through the tall grass. I loved to sniff the dandelions and watch the clouds drift by. There was Rosie, the robin, who sang the prettiest songs. Barnaby, the badger, always had a funny story to tell. And Flora, the field mouse, loved to share her snacks with Benny. Every day felt like a party in the meadow. Life was good for Benny the bunny.
Benny had always been a curious bunny. He loved to explore. He loved to peek under rocks and hop over logs. He knew every inch of the meadow, but the world beyond seemed so big and exciting. He'd often sit at the edge of the meadow, his nose twitching. He'd gaze at the distant trees, their branches waving mysteriously in the wind. What lay beyond the meadow? Benny imagined towering trees with leaves that whispered secrets. He pictured sparkling rivers where playful otters splashed. Perhaps there were even mountains that touched the clouds. The thought of adventure made Benny's heart thump. He longed to discover new places, meet new creatures, and see things he had never imagined. He had to see what lay beyond the meadow. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves in the meadow, carrying a sweet, unfamiliar scent. Benny twitched his nose, his whiskers trembling. It smelled of pine needles and wildflowers, a combination he'd never encountered before. The wind seemed to whisper, "Adventure," urging Benny onward. He glanced back at his cozy burrow, nestled beneath the roots of an old oak tree. He thought of his friends, Rosie, Barnaby, and Flora. They would miss him, he knew. But wouldn't they be excited to hear about his adventures when he returned? Benny took a deep breath and hopped to his feet. He knew, deep down, that this was something he had to do. With one last glance at his familiar meadow, Benny took a running leap and hopped onto the winding path leading towards the distant trees. Benny was off to see the world, his heart brimming with hope and anticipation. The path wound ahead of Benny, twisting and turning like a ribbon through the tall grass. The farther he hopped, the taller the grass grew, until it towered above him like a jungle. Sunbeams slanted through the leaves, painting dancing patterns on the ground. The air buzzed with the sound of unseen insects, and every rustle of leaves made Benny jump. He felt a twinge of apprehension. The meadow was familiar and safe, but this path held unknowns. What if he got lost? What if he encountered a grumpy hedgehog, or even worse, a sly fox? But then, Benny remembered the whisper of the wind, the call of adventure. He couldn't turn back now. He hopped onward, his nose twitching, taking in all the new sights and smells. A fat bumblebee buzzed past, its stripes a blur of yellow and black. A family of ducks quacked as they flew overhead, their wings beating the air. Everything was new and exciting. Benny hopped over a fallen log, its bark covered in moss, and nearly bumped into another creature. It was a little lamb, her white wool fluffy and clean, her eyes wide with surprise.
Oh, hello, I'm Lucy. What's your name? I'm Benny. I'm on an adventure. An adventure? That sounds exciting. Can I come?
She took a step closer, her tail wagging hopefully. Benny hesitated for a moment. It was his adventure after all. But Lucy seemed so friendly, and he didn't want to explore the woods alone.
Sure, the more the merrier.
Lucy bleated happily and skipped alongside Benny. She told him about her home in the meadow beyond the woods, where the grass was always greener and the flowers bloomed in every color of the rainbow. Benny felt glad to have a companion. As they walked, the woods grew darker and denser. The sunlight struggled to penetrate the thick canopy of leaves, casting long shadows on the forest floor. Benny started to feel a little uneasy. What if they got lost in this shadowy labyrinth?
Did you hear that?
She whispered, her eyes wide. Benny strained his ears. A faint hooting sound echoed through the trees, low and mournful. Before Benny could answer, something swooped down from the branches overhead. Benny and Lucy ducked, their hearts pounding. When they looked up, they saw a large owl perched on a low-hanging branch, its amber eyes fixed on them intently.
Greetings, I am Oliver. What brings you to these woods?
We're on an adventure. Benny is showing me all the wonders beyond the meadow.
She wagged her tail, her fluffy wool brushing against Benny, who suddenly felt much braver with Lucy by his side. Oliver the owl hooted softly, his amber eyes twinkling.
Adventure, you say? A worthy pursuit? But these woods can be a tricky place for young travelers. Many a creature has lost their way among the whispering trees.
He spread his wings, their span almost as wide as Benny was long. Benny stared in awe. He'd never been so close to an owl before. Oliver was magnificent.
What kind of tricky?
The whispering woods are full of twists and turns. Paths that seem to lead nowhere, shadows that play tricks on the eye. But the most treacherous spot is just ahead, the Grumbling Gorge.
The Grumbling Gorge?
Lucy repeated, her voice trembling. The name alone sounded scary. She huddled closer to Benny, who was trying to appear brave, but he felt a shiver of fear run down his spine.
A deep chasm splits the woods in two. The wind howls through the gorge, creating a grumbling sound that echoes through the trees. Many have tried to cross, but the path is treacherous.
Benny, Lucy, and Oliver stood at the edge of the Grumbling Gorge, a deep chasm with a rickety bridge spanning it.
But we have to cross. Our adventure lies on the other side.
Benny said, his voice firm despite his fear. The thought of turning back now, after coming this far, was unthinkable.
Very well, follow me, I know a way.
Benny and Lucy exchanged nervous glances but followed Oliver. Benny and Lucy followed closely behind Oliver as he led them along a narrow path, barely visible beneath a carpet of fallen leaves. The air grew colder, and the grumbling sound Oliver had described grew louder, until it felt like a rumble in their chests. Finally, they reached the edge of the gorge. Benny gasped. It was even more daunting than he had imagined. The ground fell away before them, plunging down into a seemingly bottomless chasm. A rickety-looking bridge, made of nothing more than rope and planks of wood, spanned the gap. It swayed precariously in the wind, creaking and groaning like an old man complaining about a toothache.
Oh dear, that doesn't look very safe, does it?
Benny had to agree. The bridge looked as if it could collapse at any moment, sending them plummeting into the shadowy depths below. Oliver, however, seemed unfazed. He hopped onto the edge of the bridge, testing its stability with one clawed foot. The bridge groaned ominously, but it held.
Fear not, little ones. I have a plan. This bridge may not hold the weight of 3, but it can certainly carry one at a time. Lucy, my dear, would you trust me to carry you across?
Lucy hesitated for a moment, her gaze darting between the swaying bridge and Oliver's reassuring eyes. Benny held his breath. He knew how scared Lucy must be, but he also knew they couldn't turn back now. Finally, Lucy took a deep breath and nodded.
I trust you, Oliver,
she said, her voice small but steady. With a powerful beat of his wings, Oliver lifted into the air, soaring effortlessly over the chasm. Benny watched, his heart pounding, as Oliver carried Lucy across the gorge. The wind whipped at his fur, carrying the sound of Lucy's nervous bleats and the creaking of the old bridge. He felt a moment of loneliness, wishing he could be safe on the other side with Lucy.
Oliver landed gracefully on the opposite ledge, gently lowering Lucy to the ground. She stumbled a little, her legs wobbly from fear, but she was safe. She looked back at Benny, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and exhilaration. Benny could tell she wanted to shout encouragement, but she was too breathless to speak.
Oliver turned and, with another powerful flap of his wings, soared back across the chasm towards Benny. The wind from his wings ruffled Benny's fur, and for a moment, Benny felt a surge of hope. He wasn't alone. Oliver would help him too.
Benny wanted to believe him. He really did. But looking at the swaying bridge, imagining himself clinging to Oliver's back high above that dizzying drop, filled him with terror. What if he accidentally let go? What if Oliver got tired and dropped him?
He hesitated, his paws frozen to the ground. He'd never been afraid of heights before, not really, but something about the groaning of the bridge, the echoing wind whistling through the chasm made his stomach churn.
It's all right to be afraid, Benny, Oliver said, sensing his fear. His voice was surprisingly gentle, not at all what Benny expected from a creature as big and powerful as Oliver. Bravery isn't the absence of fear, but doing what needs to be done even when you're afraid.
Benny thought about that for a moment. He had to be brave.
Look at me, Benny, Oliver said. Benny met his gaze, surprised by the kindness he saw in those amber eyes. I won't let go, I promise.
And somehow, in that moment, looking into Oliver's wise and steady eyes, Benny knew he could trust him. He took another deep breath, steadied himself, and took a running leap, landing squarely on the bridge. It swayed precariously beneath his weight, but he didn't hesitate. He kept running, his paws pounding against the rough wooden planks.
He could hear Oliver flying overhead, his wings beating the air, creating a reassuringly steady rhythm. The wind whipped at Benny's fur, trying to knock him off balance, but he kept his eyes fixed on the opposite ledge, where Lucy was waiting for him. Just when he thought he couldn't run any further, he felt solid ground beneath his paws. He'd made it.
Lucy rushed over to him, her eyes shining with relief.
Benny, you did it!
She cried, nuzzling him with her soft head. Benny laughed, a shaky sound, and nuzzled her back. He'd done it. He'd faced his fear and crossed the bridge. He'd never felt so proud of himself.
Well done, Benny. You showed great courage today.
Benny beamed, his fear forgotten. He'd faced the grumbling gorge and emerged victorious, thanks to the help of his new friends. As they set off again, with Oliver leading the way, Benny couldn't help but smile. He was ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. The forest path, bathed in the golden light of the setting sun, felt less daunting now. The trees, no longer menacing giants, swayed gently, their leaves whispering tales of the woods. Benny, his heart lighter than a dandelion seed, hopped alongside Lucy, recounting their adventure with dramatic flair.
And then the bridge groaned, and I thought for sure I was a goner. But I kept running, and Oliver, he was flying overhead, his wings making the most amazing whooshing sound.
Lucy, her eyes wide with admiration, skipped alongside him.
I knew you could do it, Benny. You were so brave.
Oliver, flying ahead of them, circled back, his amber eyes twinkling.
Indeed, Benny, you demonstrated great courage today. The Whispering Woods test the mettle of all who enter, but you faced your fears with a stout heart.
Benny, his chest puffed with pride, felt a warmth spread through him that had nothing to do with the setting sun. He had found his adventure, faced his fears, and made new friends along the way. The meadow, he knew, would always be his home, but a part of him would always long for the thrill of the unknown, the whispers of the wind calling him towards new horizons. The familiar path leading back to the meadow welcomed them like an old friend. The tall grass, no longer intimidating, swayed gently in the evening breeze. Fireflies blinked like tiny stars amongst the trees, their light a comforting beacon guiding them home.
I've had the most wonderful time, Benny. Thank you for inviting me on your adventure. It wouldn't have been the same without you, Lucy.
Benny replied, his nose twitching as he caught a whiff of clover and wildflowers, the sweet scent of home. They reached the edge of the meadow, bathed in the soft glow of the rising moon. The familiar sights and sounds of home, the babbling brook, the rustling leaves, the crickets chirping their evening song, filled Benny with a sense of peace.
This is where we part ways for now. Remember, Benny, the world is full of wonders for those who dare to seek them. Never lose your sense of adventure.
Benny watched as Oliver spread his wings and soared into the night sky, his silhouette disappearing amongst the stars. He turned to Lucy, her fleece glowing silver in the moonlight.
Thank you, Oliver.
He called out, his voice filled with gratitude. He watched until Oliver was nothing more than a speck in the starlit sky. Turning back to Lucy, he said,
I'll see you again soon, Lucy, I promise.
Lucy bleated softly, her eyes shining.
I'll be waiting, Benny.
She said, and with a flick of her tail, she disappeared into the tall grass, heading towards her own home. Benny watched her go, then turned and hopped towards his burrow, nestled beneath the roots of the old oak tree. He snuggled into his bed of soft grass, his heart content. He was home, safe and sound, but his adventure had changed him. He had faced his fears, made new friends, and discovered a courage he never knew he possessed. As he drifted off to sleep, his dreams were filled with whispering trees, rickety bridges, and the wise amber eyes of an owl named Oliver. The world, he realized, was full of possibilities, and he couldn't wait to explore them all. For Benny the Bunny, the adventure had just begun.